from DRBR Ambedkar University in Delhi, where her dissertation examined sexual violence in conflict and the role of legal frameworks in justice and survivor support. Dr. Anushka has also research and fieldwork experience with the organizations such as the Institute of Social Studies Trust and SEQUIN, focusing on gender, informal labor, and community-based sensitizations initiatives. We look forward to Dr. Anucha's insightful analysis today on key terms, key battles, understanding sexual violence in conflict through legal definitions. But allow me, before I give the floor to Dr. Anushka, let me just give you like a brief summary about who we are and what is the purpose of RCO7 from the International Political Science Association. RCO7 is a recognized study group that was founded in 1988, which was granted a research committee status in 1992 and changed the name from Women Politics in Developing Nations to Women and Politics in the Global South. Our objectives here is to focus on the process of development, issues of gender inequality, political regimes, the interplay of micro-political processes, representation, decision-making, the allocation of resources, and the removal of iniquitous relationship at all levels. We at the committee have to date paid particular attentions to, different issues of women, depths and structural adjustment, impact of women, ethnic conflict, etc. And we are currently undertaking a special study on women leadership in economic institutions. From that, we look forward to actually expanding our network, and we look forward to having more members, and also having we're interested to host researchers on such topics to come and present their topics in our committee. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Anushka for her insightful presentation, and then we'll open the floor to questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I'll just start. So, the title of my presentation is Key Terms, Key Battles Understanding Sexual Violence and Conflicts Through Legal Definition. Yeah, thank you. So, the background is in this work, I will examine how legal frameworks frame sexual violence both at the international level and India, and how these framings at times reproduce patriarchy, caste, heteronormative, and nationalist perspective. The background is sexual violence has always been present in conflicts, and for the longest time, it has been seen as a mere consequence or it was ignored in the international tribunals, such as the Nuremberg. It was barely mentioned there. Later frameworks, such as the Lieber Code or the Geneva Convention, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, began to address sexual violence, but it was in a very limited manner, ignoring the various context and dimensions of sexual violence actually. These framings associated sexual violence to women's honor and reduced survivor to this very much heterosexual cis women and to their bodies, and it systemically removed or erased the experiences of male, trans, or non-binary survivors of sexual violence. From the beginning, legal frameworks carried a very patriarchal assumptions. So next PPT, can you? Yeah. The objective of my research, so it is to examine the intersection of legal frameworks, gender and power dynamics in our society, to trace the shift in this legal frameworks in the context of sexual violence through various feminist interventions or through various cases that impacted the entire legal system. Also, to map or to highlight the similarities or gaps between how the international systems or how the Indian legal framings of sexual violence are different or similar, and how do they actually deal with sexual violence in the supposed conflict zones. And it is in the end to reveal patriarchal and heteronormative biases that are still present in our legal framings of sexual violence. The research questions are as follows. So, how do terms like genocidal rape or crime against humanity, attack on honor, attack on dignity, shape our understanding of sexual violence when international institutions use these terms to define sexual violence. Second question is, how does intensive focus on women's biological bodies while defining sexual violence can systemically erase the experiences of other trans male, non-binary survivors of sexual violence? Next slide. Okay. So this research is mostly a qualitative research. I relied on secondary sources. I did content analysis of various legal frameworks such as the Geneva Convention, CEDAW, etc., and also various international criminal tribunal from Rwanda or the former Yugoslavia. I also did studies of state-based cases such as one in Kunam Poshpura, Kashmir, the Gujarat genocide of 2002, the recent events in Manipur, all of that. The limitation of my research would be I heavily depended on the secondary data, which means the survivors' voices are somehow filtered through the existing data. And also my reflexive point, because I am also coming from a particular socio-political reality, so my perspective also influences the kind of research that I've done. Next slide. Okay. So, in the international legal frameworks, they globally recognize sexual violence, but it happened very slowly and gradually. So, the Lieber Code 1863 initially grouped it with other forms of violence. So, it was very physical in that manner and gave it no distinct status. The Geneva Convention 1949 barely mentioned it, and also mentioned it in very protection sort of narrative in the to protect women's honor. So it reinforced a very patriarchal dynamic where women are associated to males. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 ignored it completely. They did not mention sexual violence at all. So it led to a lot of feminist criticism, feminist advocacy. The CEDAW in 1979, it was one of the first international institutions that institutionalized women's rights and paved the way for recognition of gender-based violence at an international level. So this slow progression also shows how legal frameworks often lag behind feminist critique. Next slide. Okay. Yeah, okay, thank you. So the international tribunal, the one in Rwanda or the one in former Yugoslavia, also highlighted the key shift and how they expanded the definition of what sexual violence entails. So the ICTY recognized rape as a torture, as a war crime, a crime against humanity. It was an advancement for sure. It was a significant moment, but they still treated women as the fixed victim. They are the ultimate victims of sexual violence. The tribunal in Rwanda, especially in this Akayesu case 1998, it was groundbreaking. Why? Because it recognized for the first time rape as a genocidal act, how it is systemic in nature, how women are systemically targeted during these conflicts. And it also acknowledged male survivors for the first time. So it emphasized a very cultural and social dimension of sexual violence. The feminist critique also argue that these international legal frameworks are never neutral. They are very much shaped by the male dominated institution and Western power dynamics. The contradiction still remains. So, the countries that deny women's rights, such as Afghanistan, for example, they're still part of these global bodies that fight for equality, and the white savior narrative that sometimes tries to oversimplify violence and tries to erase the localized identities of caste, class, race, and how they impact the experiences of each individual. So the while the legal recognition advanced, the framework themselves reproduced hierarchies and colonial assumptions. So the next slide. Yeah, thank you. In India, rape laws have historically associated women's body to family honor and to male control, whether it's the father or brother or husband. It never ends. So the section 375 of the Indian Penal Code constructed women as the only victim. And who are these women? These are the heterosexual cis women. they are the only victims of sexual violence, and men are created as the ultimate offenders. So it, of course, systematically erases the experiences of trans male and non-binary survivors within the state system. And one of the major point is the marital rape. It's still not criminalized and is carried forward even in our new criminal code, that is Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita. So it highlights how legal frameworks sustain patriarchal family structures that prioritizes men. And certain statements from certain judges also, they reinforce this narrative of protecting the marital institution. So the rights, prioritizing marriage over the women's bodily rights. So the law here itself functions to restore this patriarchal social order. The next slide. Okay. Yeah, I talked about this. Yeah, okay, thank you. Caste and sexual violence. So caste makes this even more sharper because Dalit women, they have faced hypersexualization, exclusion from these protection narrative because they are considered to be promiscuous. Because unlike upper caste women, Dalit women have been working outside historically. So there is this one of the cases, Varghese case of 1992. It highlights how the state and the judicial bar, how they use the caste identity of the certain women to dismiss their story, to dismiss their testimony and experience, and how it intensified their trauma, also made sure to reinforce the dominant power dynamics in our society. Also, what it reflects this concept of sexual caste economy, where dominant caste men, how they every time escape accountability, while Dalit women, they remain most vulnerable within our judicial system. Indian legal framework often re- reinforce these power dynamics instead of dismantling this idea of Brahminical patriarchy. The next slide. Yeah. So, non binary and trans survivors remain excluded from the legal recognition, and we've seen it even in 2019. They finally okay, so yeah, cases like the Shivam Santosh Devangan revealed the gaps. The long struggle around Section 377 showed how colonial era laws reinforce systemic discrimination against the LGBTQ community. Even the Transgender Protection Act, it has weaker punishment for raping a trans person if you compare it to the general rape laws for straight cis het women. And it has poor execution on the ground level and delays when it comes to survivor justice. And this make trans people more systemically invisible and vulnerable in our society. And male survivors, they are properly invisible. The new criminal code does not recognize them as survivors, so it also reinforces the power dynamics, also systemically erases them. So it is interesting in that manner. So next slide. In India, there are certain suppo- supposed disturbed or conflict zones such as Manipur, Kashmir, etc. So, in conflict zones, the impunity is very much normalized. Such laws like Armed Forces Special Powers Act, ASFA, infamous, give special power to Indian Army in certain disturbed areas to maintain a public order. So, under this act, forces can search, arrest, even use force without the prior approval of some other authority. It is in a way protect offenders and enables militarized violence. From partition to 1984, Gujarat, Manipur, and Kashmir, mass sexual violence has been used to target supposed enemy communities. Yet, India has no real comprehensive legal framework to deal with mass rapes. Every time there are mass rapes, they deal with them as individual cases. So they also tried to bring this communal violence bill, but it failed. So it did not come through. So the state itself normalizes violence against women, treating it as this distinction of primary thing. It is a conflict zone thing, but it is very much a continuous thing that has been happening. So there are various case studies. The next slide. Okay. So in Gujarat, 2002, it was a genocide because Muslims were systemically targeted. Because before it happened, the Hindu houses and shops were pre-marked. So uh, when the people would come, they would not attack the supposed Hindu houses. So it was a systemic execution, it was a systemic attack on Muslim people. There was this infamous case of Bilkis Bano case, and there were rapes, but they still treated it as an individual case. So there is that. And in Manipur, AFSPA, I have already talked about AFSPA. So there has been, Operation Bluebird to Manorma Devi to 2023 riot. Sexual violence is used as punishment, justice is still denied. And in Kashmir, the 1991 Kunan Poshpara incident, where army people accused of mass rapes wo- are still not what sorry during a such operation, the survivors have still not got justice. They are still roaming freely in our society. Together these system show that how systemic impunity and state reinforcement of dominant power narratives. The next slide. Okay, thank you. Yeah. So, in conclusion, it is sexual violence and conflict. It is very systemic. It's not incidental. So, certain communities are systemically targeted. Laws and state responses also at times reproduce the patriarchal casteist and communal power dynamics. Queer and male survivors remain excluded or invisible. I've clearly talked about that. And AFSPA has these extraordinary power, and laws create the system of impunity where the offenders roam freely and the survivors are constantly silenced. International institutions also to prioritize politics over survival, as we have seen in Bangladesh. Mass rapes happened, but none of the international institution actually talked about it in a way. So what we need is an intersectional inclusive framework that goes beyond the just legal recognition. It is to challenge what power dynamics we already have in our society, and to dismantle those power dynamics, those structures. So there's that. Thank you so much. It's, it's done.